My stepmother slapped me across the face for the third time, clutching a statement showing $15 million missing. She screamed that I was a thief while my father stood silently in the doorway. They had no idea my grandfather had installed a hidden microphone in this guest house years ago. He knew exactly who took the money. That slap did not break me. It just gave me the evidence to take control of their fate. My name is Sloane Mercer, and at 26 years old, I found myself standing in the center of the guest house where I used to play hide-and-seek, waiting for my stepmother to strike me again. The air in Mapleton, Ohio, usually smelled of damp oak and expensive lawn care, but tonight, inside these four walls, it smelled of stale scotch and expensive perfume turning sour on panicked skin. The room was spinning, or maybe that was just the ringing in my left ear. Lila stood before me, her chest heaving beneath a silk blouse that cost more than the first car I ever bought. She looked like a jagged fracture in a porcelain vase, still beautiful from a distance, but sharp enough to cut you if you got too close. Her usually immaculate blonde hair was fraying at the edges, a visual echo of her unraveling sanity. In her manicured grip, she strangled a sheaf of papers. They were bank statements, thick, heavy, terrifying papers stamped with the logo of the Meridian Crest Family Trust. "You think you are so smart," Lila hissed, her voice dropping to a register that was more terrifying than her screaming. "You think because you sit behind those screens all day with your little codes and your logistics maps that we wouldn't notice? That we wouldn't see the hole you dug in this family's chest?" She threw the papers at me. They fluttered down like dead birds, scattering across the Persian rug. One sheet landed face up near my boot. I didn't need to pick it up to know the figure highlighted in aggressive yellow marker. I had seen it earlier when she shoved it in my face the first time. $15 million. That was the number. $15 million had vanished from the trust my grandfather, Elias, had built brick by brick over 50 years, and according to the woman standing in front of me, I was the architect of its disappearance. "I did not touch the trust. Lila," I said, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. It was too calm, too steady. It was the voice of someone running a supply chain crisis simulation, not a woman being assaulted in her childhood backyard. "I do not have the access codes. I never have. Grandfather set those protocols before I even graduated high school." "Liar." The word tore out of her throat. She stepped forward, the heels of her shoes clicking ominously on the hardwood. "You have those companies, those internet logistics things, Iron Root, Flowgrid, whatever shell games you are playing to wash the cash. I had the forensic accountant look at it. Sloane. He said it looks like a sophisticated routing algorithm was used to siphon the funds. Routing. That is your word. Isn't it? That is your entire life." I looked past her, towards the door. My father, Daniel, was standing there. He was not stepping inside. He was hovering on the threshold, one foot on the gravel path outside, one foot on the interior mat, as if maintaining physical ambiguity would absolve him of moral cowardice. He looked gray, aged. He refused to meet my eyes, staring instead at a spot on the wall just above my left shoulder. "Dad," I said. It wasn't a plea. It was a check to see if he was still in there. He flinched. He actually flinched at the sound of my voice. "Sloane, please," he said, his voice thin and reedy, like dry leaves skittering over pavement. "Just tell her where it is. We can fix this. We do not have to involve the authorities if you just admit it. We can say it was a mistake, a loan against your inheritance. Just admit it, and everything goes back to normal." The betrayal hit harder than Lila's hand. He believed her, or more accurately, he needed to believe her because the alternative, that his wife was lying or that the money was gone for another reason, was too terrified for him to contemplate. He wanted the path of least resistance, and I was the obstacle. "I cannot admit to something I did not do," I stated, turning my eyes back to Lila. "And you know I don't have the encryption keys. Only 2 people have those keys, Grandfather Elias, and you, Lila. You are the co-trustee." That was the wrong thing to say. Lila closed the distance between us in a blur of motion. She grabbed my upper arm, her fingers digging into the soft flesh with a strength that spoke of pure adrenaline. She shook me, her face inches from mine. I could smell the alcohol on her breath, masked by mint. "Do not you dare drag your grandfather into this," she spat. "He is an old man. He is confused. He barely knows what day of the week it is, let alone how to manage a digital transfer. You took advantage of him. You manipulated the system while he was napping." She raised her hand and struck me again. This time, I saw it coming, but I didn't flinch. I took it. The impact cracked against my cheekbone, sharp and hot. My head snapped to the side. Pain radiated through my jaw. But I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from making a sound. I would not give her the satisfaction of a scream. "Give me the passwords to your accounts," she demanded, tightening her grip on my arm until I felt my circulation cutting off. "Transfer it back. Now. Tonight. I will tell Daniel it was a glitch. I will cover for you. I will make sure you don't go to prison. But if you keep lying to me, Sloan, I will bury you. Do you understand? I will bury you under so much litigation you will never see the sun again." She was panting now, her eyes wide and manic. "Think about your little startup. Think about your reputation. One phone call from me to the SEC. One leak to the press that Sloan Mercer embezzled $15 million from her senile grandfather, and you are finished. You are nothing." I was about to respond, to tell her to go to hell, to tell her that her threats were as empty as her affection for my father, but then something caught my eye. The guest house was a relic of the past, filled with things my mother had loved before she died. Old books, velvet armchairs, and the grandfather clock on the far wall. It was a towering mahogany piece, silent for years because the pendulum had broken when I was 12. It was just a piece of furniture now. But high up, hidden within the ornate carving of the clock's crown, underneath the wooden molding of an eagle's wing, there was a faint, rhythmic pulse. Blink, darkness, blink, darkness. It was a tiny red light, so small that if you weren't looking for it, or if you weren't hyper-aware of technology like I was, you would never see it. It wasn't a reflection. It was an LED status indicator. My mind raced back to a memory from months ago. A cryptic comment Grandfather Elias had made during one of his lucid moments when I visited him at the care facility. "I am always watching the house. Sloan, even when I am not there, especially the guest house. That is where the truth lives." I had thought he meant it metaphorically. I had thought he was being poetic about the ghosts of our family. But Elias Mercer was not a poet. He was a shark who had built an empire on information. That was a camera, a high-definition, active recording device, and judging by the angle, it had a perfect view of the entire living area. It saw Lila's contorted face. It saw the papers on the floor. It saw my father cowering in the doorway. And it had heard every single word. Lila mistook my silence for defiance. With a growl of frustration, she shoved me backward. My boot slipped on the polished floor. I stumbled, my lower back colliding hard with the edge of the heavy oak writing desk. Pain shot up my spine. Stealing my breath for a second, I slumped against the wood, gripping the edge to keep from falling completely. "Stop looking at me like that," Lila screamed. "Like you are the victim. You are the thief. You are the ungrateful brat who thinks the world owes her a living because her mother died." The mask was completely off now. This wasn't a family meeting. This wasn't an intervention. This was an interrogation designed to produce a scapegoat. She needed me to break. She needed a confession, any confession, to explain the missing $15 million to the board, to the tax authorities, to whoever was asking questions she couldn't answer. I realized then that my safety depended entirely on how I played the next 60 seconds. If I fought back physically, if I pushed her or hit her, she would have the bruises to prove I was violent and out of control. She would spin the narrative that I attacked her when confronted with my crime. My father would back her up because he was too weak to do anything else. But if I stayed silent, they would keep escalating until they fabricated the evidence they needed. I needed to go on the record. I pulled myself up, straightening my spine despite the throbbing ache in my back. I took a deep breath, composing my face into a mask of absolute, terrifying calm. I looked past Lila, past the hysteria, and focused my gaze directly on that tiny red light in the clock face. I locked eyes with the lens. "This is interesting," I said, my voice clear, projecting slightly so the microphone would catch every syllable. I saw Lila pause, confused by my sudden shift in tone. "It is fascinating that a person who has absolutely no administrative rights to the trust, no tokens, and no signatory power is being accused of a wire transfer by the one person who signs every single check." Lila froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a second, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. She looked at me, then glanced around the room, trying to understand who I was talking to. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, the venom replaced by sudden paranoia. "I am talking about the audit trail. Lila," I continued, still holding the gaze of the camera. "You can hit me, you can scream at me, you can try to bully a confession out of me to cover your tracks. But logistics leave a footprint. $15 million does not just vanish into the ether, it travels. And unlike you, I know how to read the map." Lila stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. She looked at her hands, then at the papers on the floor, and finally back at me. She didn't know about the camera, but she sensed a shift in the power dynamic. She sensed that her intimidation tactic had hit a wall she couldn't punch through. She spun around, marching towards the door where my father stood. "I am calling the family attorney," she announced, her voice trembling with rage and something that looked a lot like fear. "And then I am calling the sheriff. We will see how arrogant you are when you are sitting in a holding cell. Sloan." She brushed past my father, who looked at me one last time. His eyes were wet. "Why couldn't you just work with us, Sloan?" he whispered. Then he turned and followed her into the night. The heavy wooden door slammed shut. I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home from the outside. They were locking me in. I stood there in the silence of the guest house. The adrenaline that had kept me upright began to fade, replaced by the stinging throb in my cheek and the deep ache in my lower back. I touched my face. The skin was hot, feverish. My hand was shaking. I slid down to the floor, leaning my back against the desk where she had shoved me. The room was quiet, save for the wind rustling the hydrangeas outside and the rhythmic ticking of the broken time. I looked up at the clock again. The red light was still blinking, steady, unwavering, a digital heartbeat in the dark. Grandfather Elias knew. He had to know. He hadn't just installed a camera. He had set a trap. He knew Lila would eventually turn on me. He knew the money would go missing. He knew that one day, she would drag me out here, away from the servants and the security cameras of the main house, to do her dirty work. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me, cooling the heat on my face. "If you are listening, Grandfather," I whispered to the empty room, my voice catching in my throat, "I hope you got a good angle." I picked up one of the bank statements lying near my foot. I smoothed out the crumpled paper. $15 million. It was a life-changing amount of money for most people. For Lila, it was a necessity to maintain an illusion. For me, it was a weapon. She thought she had trapped me in here. She thought she had cut me off from the world. But she didn't understand who I was anymore. I wasn't the little girl who cried when she lost her mother. I wasn't the teenager she had exiled to boarding school. I was a logistics expert. My entire career was built on finding things that were lost and optimizing paths through chaotic systems. She had just handed me the starting coordinates of the biggest job of my life. "You want to talk about routing, Lila?" I murmured, staring at the red light as if it were an audience of one. "Fine, let's track this package." Tonight, she had struck me. She had bruised me. She had locked me up. But she had made a fatal error. She had assumed that because I was in the guest house, I was helpless. She didn't know that this room wasn't a prison cell. It was a command center. And as long as that red light was blinking, I wasn't alone. Every lie she told, every threat she made, Every blow she landed was being saved, encrypted, and stored. She was digging her own grave, shovel by shovel, dollar by dollar, and I was going to be the one to kick the dirt in. But to understand how we got here, to this night, to the missing 15 million, and to the war that was about to burn Mapleton to the ground, you have to go back. You have to understand the beginning. You have to know about the day my mother died, and the day the beautiful, poisonous Lila walked into our lives with a smile that hit 1,000 knives. I leaned my head back against the wood and closed my eyes, waiting for the sirens. Let them come. I was ready. To understand why I did not scream when my stepmother hit me, you have to understand Mapleton, Ohio. It is the kind of town that looks like it was stamped out of a mold in a factory designed to produce the American dream. We had wide streets lined with oaks that turned a uniform shade of burnt orange in October. We had a high school football team that everyone treated like a religion, and we had the Mercer family. Growing up, I learned early on that I was not just Sloan, I was a Mercer. In Mapleton, that name meant something. It meant my grandfather, Elias Mercer, owned the ground most people walked on. Meridian Crest Holdings was not just a company, it was the gravitational center of the county. If you went shopping, you were likely in a Meridian mall. If you rented an apartment downtown, you wrote your check to a subsidiary of Meridian. If you drove past the new luxury condos near the lake, you were looking at Elias Mercer's retirement plan. My mother was the soft part of that legacy. She was the one who made the big, echoing house feel like a home. When she died of ovarian cancer when I was 14, the silence she left behind was deafening. It was a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Enter Lila. Lila did not just marry my father. She colonized him. She arrived 18 months after the funeral, dragging a chaotic amount of Louis Vuitton luggage and a daughter named Harper who was my age but lived in a completely different universe. Lila was beautiful in a way that required maintenance and an audience. She was sharp, social, and knew exactly how to play the role of the grieving widower's savior. To the town, she was a miracle. To the country club set, she was the perfect hostess. To me, she was the architect of my invisibility. Then there was Harper. If I was a rough draft, Harper was the final print. She was blonde, bubbly, and possessed an terrifying ability to be liked by everyone. She became the captain of the cheerleading squad within 3 months of transferring to Mapleton High. She won the local beauty pageant. She volunteered at the animal shelter, but only walked the puppies that looked good in photos. She was the future of the Mercer family, a title Lila bestowed upon her over Sunday roast. Ignoring the fact that Harper did not actually carry the Mercer blood, I became a ghost in my own house, while Harper was practicing cheer routines in the living room, shaking the floorboards with her stomps. I retreated up. The attic of our Victorian mansion was not the creepy cobweb-filled space you see in horror movies. It was my command center. I dragged an old oak desk up there and set up my sanctuary. I had a refurbished laptop that I had bought with money I made fixing neighbors' Wi-Fi routers, and I had maps, stacks of them. I was obsessed with infrastructure. I loved looking at highway systems, rail lines, and shipping routes. There was something soothing about the logic of logistics. In the real world, people lied, feelings got hurt, and mothers died for no reason. But on a map, if you followed Interstate 70 West, you knew exactly where you would end up. It was a system of rules that actually worked. Dinner time was the daily torture session. We would sit at the long mahogany table, Dad at the head, looking tired and vague, Lila at the other end, radiating aggressive hospitality. Harper and I on the sides. Harper was just amazing at practice today, Lila would say, pouring wine for herself and sparkling water for Harper. Coach Miller says she is a shoo-in for homecoming queen. Can you imagine, Daniel, a Mercer as queen? That is great, Dad would say, slicing his steak with mechanical precision. Good job, Harper. And, Lila would continue, her eyes gleaming, I was talking to the mayor's wife at the charity gala planning committee. She thinks Harper should look into interning at the cultural center this summer. It is such a good networking opportunity. Networking. Harper was 16. She did not need a network. She needed to learn how to pass algebra, but nobody talked about Harper's grades, which were mediocre at best. They talked about her presence. Eventually, Dad would remember I was there. He would look over his glasses, blinking as if surprised to see me. "And how was your day, Sloan? Everything good at school?" "It was fine," I would say. "I got an A on my calculus midterm." "Math," Lila would sigh, as if I had said I contracted a skin rash. "You are always so buried in those books, Sloan. You should get out more. Be like Harper. She is glowing." I wasn't glowing. I was calculating. I was spending my nights on logistics forums, learning about supply chain management and tracking algorithms. I was mapping the delivery routes of the FedEx trucks that came to our house daily with Lila's online shopping packages, figuring out how they could save 12 minutes by altering their loop. My father, Daniel, was a good man once, I think, but grief had hollowed him out, and Lila had filled the empty space with her own will. He deferred to her on everything to keep the peace. When I asked to take the old Volvo station wagon, my mom's car, to drive to the library, Lila said it was unsafe and an eyesore. Dad nodded and sold it the next week. Harper got a brand new convertible for her 17th birthday because it was safer. The breaking point came during the winter of my senior year. I had applied, secretly, to a specialized program in Denver. It was a scholarship program for data science and logistics, aimed at young innovators. It wasn't Ivy League. It wasn't prestigious in the way Lila understood. But for me, it was Mecca. It was fully paid tuition. But I needed support for room and board because the dorms weren't covered. I brought the acceptance letter to dinner. I placed it next to my water glass, waiting for a lull in Harper's monologue about the theme for the winter formal. "I got into the program in Denver," I said, cutting through a description of silver balloons. "The logistics one, they only take 20 students from the whole country." My father stopped chewing. He picked up the letter, reading it with a furrowed brow. "Denver? That is far away. Sloan. It is a great program. Dad, it is exactly what I want to do." Lila reached over and plucked the letter from his hands. Her manicured nails tapped against the paper. She scanned it, her lip curling slightly. "Data and logistics," she said, pronouncing the words like they were dirty. "Sloan, honey, this is technical school stuff. This is for truck drivers and warehouse workers." "It is supply chain engineering," I corrected, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "It is how the world works, Lila." "It is tech nonsense," she dismissed, dropping the letter back onto the table as if it were a napkin. "Daniel, look at the housing costs. It is exorbitant. And out-of-state living expenses? We have already committed so much to Harper's prep courses for the state university, and the liquidity of the trust is tight right now with the market being down." That was a lie. I knew the market wasn't down. I tracked the Meridian Crest stocks. They were up 4% that quarter. "Dad," I said, looking directly at him, "I earned the tuition. I just need help with the rent. It is an investment." Dad looked at me. Then he looked at Lila. I saw the calculation happen in real time behind his eyes. Supporting me meant fighting Lila. Supporting me meant an argument that would last for weeks. It meant cold shoulders and slammed doors. "Lila is right, Sloan," he said, his voice heavy with compromise. "It is a lot of money for a certificate program. Maybe you should look at the community college here. Stay close to home. You can help your grandfather." I felt something snap inside me. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet, like a twig breaking under deep snow. "Okay," I said. I picked up the letter. "I understand." I didn't eat the rest of my meal. The only person who saw me, who really saw me, was Grandfather Elias. By that time, he was already stepping back from the daily operations of the company, spending his days in the sunroom with his whiskey and his Wall Street Journal. He was a hard man, known for ruthless deals in the 80s, but he had a soft spot for intelligence. One Saturday, a few weeks after the dinner incident, he found me in the library. I had my laptop open, and I was overlaying a topographic map of Ohio with the rail distribution network, color-coding the congestion points. He leaned on his cane, peering over my shoulder. He smelled of old tobacco and peppermint. "You are drawing the whole country, are you?" he asked, his voice raspy. I didn't close the laptop like I usually did when Lila walked in. "Just finding the bottlenecks. Grandfather, look, the grain shipments get stuck here in Toledo for an average of 40 hours because of a switching error in the scheduling software. If they just routed them through the southern spur, they would save 2 days." He leaned in closer, his watery blue eyes narrowing. He traced the line on my screen with a trembling finger. 2 days. In this business, 2 days is a lot of money. He looked at me then, not past me, not through me, but at me. He looked at my plain clothes, my tied-back hair, the intensity in my face that mirrored his own. "You are not like them," he said softly. He didn't specify who them were, but we both knew. He meant the cheerleaders, the socialites, the people who thought value was something you wore, not something you built. "I am just trying to figure out how things move," I said. "I am trying to find a way out of this town. Grandfather." He chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Smart girl. The only way out is through the data." He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small, silver object. It was a USB drive. It looked old. The casing scratched. The kind of thing you would find in a junk drawer. "Take this," he said, pressing it into my hand. His skin was like dry paper, cool to the touch. "What is it?" I asked. "Insurance," he whispered. "Backups, old contracts, things people think are dead and buried. I digitized them years ago when everyone else was still using filing cabinets. Nobody knows it exists. Not your father. Certainly not his wife." I looked at the drive, then back at him. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because you are the only one who knows how to read a map," he said. "When you leave, and you will leave, Sloan, do not let them keep you here. Take this with you. Do not open it yet. Just keep it safe. One day, the road will get dark, and you will need a light. You will understand why then." He patted my hand, then turned and shuffled away, tapping his cane on the hardwood floor. That night, lying in my bed in the attic, holding the cold metal of the USB drive, the picture became clear. I realized that Lila wasn't just a mean stepmother. She was a corporate raider. She was acquiring the Mercer family assets. My father was a hostile takeover target that had already surrendered. Harper was the rebranding campaign. And me? I was the redundancy. I was the surplus variable in the equation. I was the lingering operational cost that needed to be cut to maximize profits. Lila didn't want me to go to Denver not because of the money, but because she needed to clip my wings. She needed me small. She needed me dependent. Or better yet, she needed me gone, but gone in a way that didn't make her look bad. I looked at the acceptance letter for the Denver program that I had smoothed out and pinned to my corkboard. Dad said no money. Lila said it was nonsense. But I looked at my maps. I looked at the routes I had designed. I looked at the shipping lanes that connected Mapleton to the rest of the world. There were thousands of trucks leaving this state every single day. There were millions of dollars flowing over the asphalt. I didn't need their permission. I didn't need their trust fund. I just needed to be smarter than them. I packed a bag that night, just a small one. I put the USB drive in the hidden zipper pocket of my backpack. I wasn't leaving yet. I needed a plan. I needed cash. But mentally, I had already walked out the door. The warm, fuzzy family narrative was a lie. I was living in a hostile work environment, and my job description was victim, but they forgot to check my resume. I wasn't a victim. I was an analyst. And for the first time, I began to see my family not as people I loved who hurt me, but as a system that was malfunctioning. And systems could be hacked. Systems could be rerouted. I fell asleep listening to the wind rattle the attic window, dreaming of highway interchanges and the beautiful silent geometry of revenge. I didn't know it then. But the tech nonsense Lila mocked was about to become the only weapon sharp enough to cut through the knot she was tying around my inheritance. By the time I turned 19, The air in the Mercer household had become so thin I could barely breathe. Lila had been orchestrating my exit strategy for months, dropping subtle hints over breakfast about the virtues of independence and the character-building nature of struggle, virtues she certainly never applied to her own daughter, Harper, whose idea of struggle was deciding between the Range Rover and the BMW. The hammer finally dropped on a Tuesday evening. It was orchestrated with the precision of a military coup. Lila sat Daniel down in the sunroom, holding a glass of Chardonnay, and explained that for my own good, I needed to learn how to stand on my own 2 feet. She called it tough love. I called it eviction. "We are doing you a disservice, Sloane," Lila said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "Keeping you here, under our roof, paying for everything. You are drifting. You need to find your hunger." My father, whose spine had effectively dissolved over the last 5 years, nodded in agreement. "Lila thinks it is time you moved out of the main bedroom," he said, staring at his shoes. "Just to give you a push, you can stay in the guest house for a few weeks until you find an apartment and a job." The guest house, the same place where, years later, I would be slapped and interrogated. Back then, it was just a dusty storage space filled with old furniture and spiders. It was a clear demotion. It was a message. You are a guest in your own history. I tried to argue. I tried to show them my acceptance letter to the State University's Advanced Logistics program, a compromise I had made since they refused to pay for Denver. I laid out my plan. I talked about supply chain management, about the exploding e-commerce sector, about how I wanted to build systems that move the world. Daniel cut me off with a wave of his hand. "Sloane, please, be realistic. Logistics? That is trucking. That is warehouse work. The Mercer family does not fund blue-collar fantasies. If you wanted to study art history or business administration like Harper, we could discuss tuition. But this tech nonsense? No, we are not throwing money into a black hole." That phrase, tech nonsense, was Lila's signature. I heard it come out of his mouth and knew it was over. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. "Fine," I said. The anger wasn't hot. It was cold and hard, like a block of ice in my stomach. If I am going to be independent, I am going to be actually independent. I do not need the guest house, and I do not need you. I packed 2 duffel bags. I took my clothes, my beat-up laptop, and the silver USB drive grandfather Elias had given me. I didn't say goodbye to Harper, who was busy FaceTiming a friend about her upcoming spring break trip to Cabo. I walked out the front door, past the manicured hedges, and got into a cab. I didn't go to the guest house. I went to the Greyhound station. I took a bus to Columbus. It was the nearest major city, big enough to get lost in, small enough to afford. I had $1,200 in savings from secret tutoring gigs I had done in high school. That was it. The first 6 months were a blur of grease and exhaustion. I rented a room in a basement apartment that smelled perpetually of damp carpet and boiled cabbage. I got a job at a 24-hour diner called the Night Owl. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and the clientele consisted of long-haul truckers and college students sobering up. I worked the graveyard shift. My hands, which used to play piano at Lila's parties, were now covered in burns from the toaster and cracks from the industrial sanitizer. But strangely, I wasn't miserable. For the first time in years, nobody was watching me. Nobody was judging my clothes or my silence. I was just a waitress. I was invisible, and in that invisibility, I found freedom. Between shifts, I kept my laptop open on the wobbly kitchen table in my apartment. I didn't have the money for college, so I hacked my own education. I pirated textbooks on operations research. I lurked on forums for supply chain managers. I watched lectures from MIT OpenCourseWare at 2 a.m, eating stale fries I had brought home from work. I needed a way into the industry. I applied to every logistics firm in Columbus, but without a degree, nobody looked at my resume. Finally, I got a break. It wasn't glamorous. It was a small trucking and courier company called Iron Route Transit. They needed someone to answer phones and enter data into their archaic system. The pay was $2 above minimum wage. I took it. Iron Route was chaos. The office was a trailer parked in a gravel lot full of semi-trucks. It smelled of diesel and stale tobacco. The dispatcher, a guy named Frank, who looked like he had been carved out of granite and high blood pressure, spent his entire day screaming into a radio. "No, Tony, you cannot take the obsession route. The bridge is out. You are going to be 3 hours late," Frank would yell, slamming his fist on a desk covered in paper maps and sticky notes. My job was to take the paper manifests, stacks of carbon copy forms, and type the addresses into a spreadsheet so they could bill the clients. It was mindless work. But as I typed, I started to see the patterns. I saw that Tony was driving the same route every Tuesday, but hitting traffic on the I-70 interchange because he left at 8 in the morning. I saw that we were sending 3 different trucks to the same industrial park on 3 different days, carrying half-loads, when we could have consolidated them into one run on Thursday. I saw money burning. I kept my mouth shut for the first 2 months. I was just the data girl. But one night, Frank was losing his mind. A driver had quit. A shipment of medical supplies was late, and he was trying to route a delivery across the city during rush hour. "I cannot do it," Frank shouted, rubbing his temples. "There is no way to hit all 5 stops before 5 o'clock. I looked up from my keyboard. "Actually, there is." Frank glared at me. "What do you know about it? Mercer?" I stood up and walked over to the large map of Columbus pinned to the wall. "You are trying to route him in a circle," I said, tracing the path with my finger. "But if you use the back roads near the river for the first 2 stops, you bypass the construction on 3rd Street. Then, instead of coming back to the highway, he cuts through the Warehouse District Alley, which is legal for trucks under 10 tons, and hits the last 3 in reverse order. He will save 40 minutes of drive time and about 4 gallons of diesel." Frank looked at the map. He looked at me. He picked up his radio. "Tony, listen to me. Forget the manifest. Here is what you are going to do." Tony made the delivery with 15 minutes to spare. The next day, Frank dropped a stack of manifests on my desk. "Do it again," he grunted. That was the beginning. I stopped just entering data. I started analyzing it. I stayed late after everyone left, pulling the raw data from their ancient server into Excel. I wrote basic macros, simple scripts that would automatically flag inefficient routes. I taught myself Python because Excel was too slow. I built a crude algorithm that factored in traffic patterns, driver shift limits, and fuel costs. I called it Project Iron. 3 months later, I walked into the owner's office. His name was Mr. Henderson, a tired man who was barely breaking even against the big corporate fleets. "Mr. Henderson," I said, placing a single sheet of paper on his desk, "I have been running a simulation on your fleet for the last quarter. By reorganizing the delivery zones and implementing a dynamic routing schedule based on the algorithm I wrote, I saved Iron Route 312 driving hours last month." He looked at the paper. 300 hours? "And roughly $12,000 in fuel and overtime," I added. "And that is just with me doing it manually. If we automate it, I can double that." Mr. Henderson looked at me. He didn't see a 20-year-old college dropout in a thrift store blazer. He saw survival. "You are indispensable, kid," he said. That word hit me harder than I expected. Indispensable. In the Mercer house, I was disposable. I was a spare part. But here, in a trailer smelling of diesel, I was the engine. I realized then that Lila was wrong. She thought power came from status, from dinner parties, from knowing the right people. But she was playing a game of perception. Real power came from utility. Real power was making yourself the person who knew how to turn the lights on when the grid went down. The world was a mess of moving parts. People like Lila and Harper just rode on top of the chaos, assuming things would always arrive at their doorsteps. But people like me? We controlled the flow. I didn't stay at Iron Route forever. I knew I had something bigger than a trucking company optimizer. I spent my nights coding, building a scalable version of my algorithm. I named it Flow Grid Route. It was designed for small and medium businesses, the florists, the local bakeries, the independent couriers, who couldn't afford the million-dollar software the giants used. I moved out of the basement and into a small studio apartment. It wasn't much, but it had a window and a desk. I bought a better server. I registered the LLC, Flowgrid Root Holdings. One night, sitting amidst a tangle of Ethernet cables and empty coffee cups, my email chimed. It was a message from an address I didn't recognize. Old Man Mapleton at SecureMail.com. I opened it. Sloan. Marcy tells me you are in Columbus. She says you are working with trucks. Good. Maps are useless if you just hang them on a wall. They are meant to be used. I am proud of you. Not because you are a mercer, but because you figured out that a map is a tool to go towards something, not just to run away. Keep building. The roads are longer than you think. E. I stared at the screen, tears pricking my eyes. He was watching, even from his self-imposed exile in the sunroom. Grandfather Elias was tracking me. He hadn't intervened. He hadn't sent money. He had let me starve a little, let me work in that diner, let me scrape my knuckles, because he knew I needed to build the muscle. He knew I needed to understand the value of $1 and the cost of a mile. I reached into my desk drawer and touched the cool metal of the USB drive. I still hadn't opened it. I didn't need to yet. I was building my own leverage now. A week later, Flowgrid Route got its first paying customer, a regional medical courier service. They paid me $500 a month for access to the platform. It wasn't a fortune. It wasn't $15 million. But when that check cleared, it felt heavier than any gold bar. I looked at the bank notification on my phone. $500. It was a start. I thought about Lila in her mansion, worrying about social standing and centerpieces. She was playing checkers. I was learning how to build the board. She didn't understand that the world didn't run on charm. It ran on logistics. It ran on data. And for the first time in my life, I was holding the keys to the ignition. 3 years into my exile, Flowgrid Route had graduated from a chaotic idea in a studio apartment to a legitimate operation occupying the 3rd floor of a refurbished warehouse in Denver. We were not a unicorn startup making headlines in Silicon Valley, but we were profitable. We had 6 full-time engineers, a coffee machine that actually worked, and a client list that included 3 regional grocery chains. I was busy. I was tired. I was happy. Then the message came. It was not an email this time. It was a handwritten note delivered by a private courier, sealed in a plain manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet of hotel stationery from the Westin near the Denver International Airport. Room 412. Tuesday, 3 in the afternoon. Come alone. Do not tell your father. The handwriting was shaky, the letters spiderwebbing across the page, but the signature was unmistakable. A sharp, aggressive E. Grandfather Elias. I canceled my afternoon meeting with the development team, telling them I had a family emergency. It was the first time I had used the word family in years without a bitter aftertaste. The hotel room was generic, beige walls, abstract art that looked like spilled mustard, and the low hum of the air conditioner fighting the dry Colorado heat. When I knocked, the door opened slowly. Elias Mercer stood there. He looked smaller than I remembered. The imposing figure who used to terrify the Mapleton zoning board had shrunk inside his cashmere cardigan. He leaned heavily on a cane made of dark walnut, his hand trembling slightly as he gripped the handle. His hair, once silver steel, was now white and wispy. "Sloan," he said, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping together. "You look tired. Good. Tired means you are building something." "Hello, Grandfather," I said, stepping inside. "You look old?" He let out a wheezing chuckle and shuffled towards the small round table near the window. "Do not lie to me. I am 82 years old, and my hip feels like it is made of rusted iron. Sit down." He didn't offer a hug. We weren't that kind of family. Instead, he gestured to the chair opposite him. On the table, a leather satchel sat open. He reached into it, his hand shaking violently for a moment before he steadied it against the table edge. He pulled out a stack of papers and fanned them out. They were bank statements. Meridian Crest Family Trust. "I have been following your little company," Elias said, ignoring the papers for a moment. Flow grid. You analyze traffic patterns. Yes? You look at a map. You see where the trucks are going, and you tell them where they are wasting time. That is the simplified version, but yes, I said, we optimize the flow of goods. Good, he nodded. He tapped a bony finger on the papers. Then look at this. Tell me what you see. If this were a fleet of trucks carrying produce instead of wire transfers carrying capital, what would you tell the client? I pulled the papers closer. I wasn't a forensic accountant. But money moves just like cargo. It has an origin, a destination, and stops in between. I scanned the columns, the dates, the amounts. It was a series of transfers, high-value transactions, all moving in a specific rhythm. Here, I said, pointing to a line item dated 6 months ago. $200,000 moved to a holding company in Delaware. Then, 48 hours later, a nearly identical amount, minus a 1.5% transaction fee, moves from Delaware to an account in the Cayman Islands. Then it vanishes. I flipped the page. And here, another one. 300,000. Same route. Delaware, Caymans, gone. And look at the dates. They always happen on the last Friday of the month, right before the reconciliation reports are generated. I looked up at him. This is efficient. It is too efficient. It is structured to look like vendor payments. But the end point is a black hole. If this were a truck route, I would say someone is offloading cargo onto a ghost fleet to avoid way stations. Elias leaned back, a grim satisfaction settling over his face. The tremble in his hand seemed to vanish for a second. Exactly. It is a smuggling route. Who is doing this? I asked, though a cold pit was already forming in my stomach. Dad? Elias scoffed. Your father could not smuggle a candy bar out of a grocery store. He sees what he wants to see. He signs where she points. Lila, I whispered. She is getting impatient, Elias said. He looked out the window at the planes taking off in the distance. She has been pushing me for months. She brings lawyers to the house. She brings doctors. She tells Daniel that I'm slipping, that I'm forgetting names, that the estate planning needs to be modernized before I lose my faculties completely. He turned his gaze back to me. His eyes were not the eyes of a senile man. They were sharp, cold, and terrifyingly lucid. She calls you irresponsible, you know, he said quietly. She tells the board members that you are out here in Denver playing with computers, wasting your potential, living a chaotic life. She paints you as a loose cannon so that when she makes her move, no one will look to you for leadership. And you let her? I asked, a flash of old hurt sparking in my chest. I encourage her, Elias corrected. I stared at him. What? I am old. Sloan. I cannot fight a war on the front lines anymore. So I play the part. I let my hand shake a little more than it needs to. I ask her to repeat things. I pretend to nap in the sunroom. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You learn a lot when people think you are asleep. People get careless around the furniture. He tapped the table again. Last week, she was on the phone in the hallway. She thought I was dozing in the armchair. She was talking to someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a banker. I do not know yet, but I heard the number. She said they needed a $15 million cushion, a safety net, just in case things with the estate take too long. $15 million, I repeated. The number hung in the air, heavy and grotesque. That is theft, grandfather. That is embezzlement. It is only theft if you catch them taking it out of the safe, Elias said. If they convince the owner to open the door, it is just bad management. She is trying to structure it so it looks like bad investments, like market losses. She wants to drain the liquidity so that when I die, the trust is hollow, and the money is sitting in her private accounts offshore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He placed it on the table and slid it across to me. I opened it. Inside was a USB drive. It wasn't the same one he had given me years ago. This one was newer, sleek, made of brushed aluminum. The one I gave you before was the foundation, he said. This is the structure. I have spent the last year digitizing everything. The original incorporation papers of Meridian Crest, The addendums to the trust from 1995 that your father has forgotten about. The clauses regarding fiduciary duty that Lila thinks do not apply to her because she married into the name. Why are you giving this to me? I asked. Why don't you just fire her? You are still the chairman. Because if I fire her now, she leaves with what she has already taken, and she takes half your father's soul with her. She will claim I am incompetent. She will drag the family name through the mud for years. He shook his head. No, I do not want to just stop her. I want to expose the root. I want to prove that she is not just a bad wife, but a bad operator. He looked at me with a vulnerability I had never seen before. My fear is not losing the money. Sloan, we can make more money. You are making money right now. My fear is that this family, the legacy I built, the legacy your mother helped maintain, will be steered by people who only know how to consume. Lila, Harper, even your father now. They are consumers. They eat. They take. They do not create. He pointed his cane at my chest. You create. You built a system out of nothing. You understand that value comes from movement, from work. You are the only one left who knows how to drive the truck. Everyone else is just arguing over the radio stations. I realized then that I had spent my entire young adult life feeling like the outcast, the spare part, the disappointment. But in Elias's eyes, I wasn't the exile. I was the contingency plan. I was the map keeper. He hadn't sent me away to punish me. He had sent me away to keep me clean, to keep me uncorrupted by the rot that had taken over the main house. What do you want me to do? I asked, clutching the USB drive. Nothing, Elias said firmly. Not yet. Go back to your office. Keep building your company. Let them think you are gone. Let Lila think she has won. Let her get confident. Arrogance is the best camouflage for a trap. He began to gather the bank statements, shoving them back into his satchel with surprising speed. But listen to me closely. Sloan, he said, his voice steel. Do not come back to Mapleton for Christmas. Do not come back for birthdays. Do not come back because you miss the oak trees. He locked eyes with me. Do not come back until you are forced to, when they call you, when they drag you in, when they demand your presence. That is when you go. Because if they are calling you back, it means the fire has already started burning at their feet, and they are looking for someone to blame. He stood up, wincing slightly as his hip took his weight. When that happens, you bring that drive, you bring your maps, and you show them who actually owns the road. I stood up too. I wanted to help him, to offer him my arm, but I knew he would hate that. He was a proud man playing a weak role, and he needed to stay in character. I understand, I said. I will wait for the signal. Good girl. He didn't say he loved me. He didn't say he missed me. He adjusted his collar and looked at the door. Now go. Leave through the side exit. I have a car waiting for me at the front. I walked to the door. My hand was on the knob when I turned back. Grandfather? Yes? Are you okay, really? He paused, leaning on his cane, silhouetted against the bright, harsh light of the airport window. I am tired of playing the fool. Sloan, it is exhausting work. Make sure when you come back, you make it worth the performance. I nodded and slipped out into the hallway. I walked through the hotel lobby, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt heavy, not with sadness, but with responsibility. I wasn't just a logistics coordinator anymore. I was a sleeper agent in my own family's war. As I passed the large glass windows of the hotel entrance, I looked back towards the parking lot. A black town car was pulling up. Through the glass of the hotel restaurant, I saw Elias. He was sitting alone at the table where I had left him, waiting for his driver. He wasn't looking at the door. He wasn't staring into space like a confused geriatric. He had a tablet propped up against the sugar dispenser. His fingers, the ones that had trembled so convincingly when he handed me the papers, were now flying across the screen with the dexterity of a concert pianist. He was swiping, tapping, zooming in. He looked like a commander reviewing satellite imagery. He wasn't just watching the house. He was watching everything. He looked up, just for a second, and caught my eye through the glass. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just tapped the screen once, firmly, and then looked back down at his work. The message was clear. I have the data. You have the map. Wait for the crash. I stepped out into the Denver sun, clutching the USB drive in my pocket like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. I went back to my office. I optimized 3 shipping routes that afternoon. I fired a lazy contractor. I worked with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Lila wanted a cushion of $15 million? Fine. I would make sure that when she finally fell, she hit the concrete. The call came on a Thursday night, slicing through the quiet hum of my server room in Denver. It was my father, Daniel. His voice sounded thin, stretched tight over a framework of panic that he was trying very hard to disguise as familial concern. He told me that grandfather Elias had taken a turn for the worse. He said the doctors were using words like cognitive decline and imminent transition. He said it was time for the family to gather. He said I needed to come home. We need to discuss the future. Sloan, he had said, his breath hitching slightly. We need to be under one roof. I stared at the blinking lights of the FlowGrid server rack. My gut told me to hang up. My gut told me that Mapleton was a bear trap, and I was walking straight into the teeth. But I looked at the safe where I kept the USB drive Elias had given me 3 years ago. If they were calling me back, it meant the fire Elias had predicted was already burning. It meant the money was gone. I drove the rental car up the long, winding driveway of the Mercer estate 2 days later. The house looked the same, imposing, Victorian, suffocating. But as soon as I stepped through the double oak doors, I felt the difference. The air was stale, lacking the scent of fresh lilies that my mother, and later the staff, had always insisted on, but it was the walls that stopped me cold. In the main foyer, to the left of the grand staircase, there used to be a massive oil painting. It was a 19th century landscape, a moody depiction of a storm over a valley that grandfather loved. It was gone. In its place was a rectangle of wallpaper that was a slightly brighter shade of cream than the rest, marking where the frame had hung for 40 years. I walked into the drawing room. The silver candlesticks were missing from the mantelpiece. The Persian rug, an antique that was worth more than my first apartment, had been replaced by a generic, modern piece that looked like it came from a catalog. Lila descended the stairs. She was wearing a black dress that was tasteful enough for morning, but tight enough for a cocktail party. She looked tired, her makeup applied a little too heavily around the eyes to hide the dark circles. "Sloan," she said, not offering a hug. "You made it." "Where is the landscape, Lila?" I asked, pointing to the empty spot on the wall. She didn't even blink. "We are redecorating, modernizing. Your father and I felt the house was becoming a mausoleum. We sent some pieces out for restoration." "Restoration," I repeated. "Is that what we are calling liquidation these days?" Lila's eyes narrowed. "Do not start, Sloan. Your father is stressed enough." Dinner was a theater of the absurd. We sat at the long table. Me, Dad, Lila, and Harper. Harper was glowing, oblivious to the tension vibrating in the air like a high-tension wire. She was talking about her new venture, a boutique real estate firm called Harper & Company, which aimed to flip luxury properties in the Caribbean. "It is going to be huge," Harper chirped, spearing a piece of asparagus. "We already have the seed capital secured. Mom helped me set up the initial investment structure. We are closing on 3 beachfront villas next week." I looked at my father. He was pushing peas around his plate, refusing to make eye contact. "That is impressive, Harper," I said, my voice level. "Capital for Caribbean real estate is not cheap. Did you get a bank loan? Interest rates are high right now." "Oh, we did not need a bank," Harper said, smiling at Lila. "Mom handled the financing internally. It is a family investment, right?" Lila dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Harper, eat your dinner. Sloan does not need the boring details of business structures." "Actually," I said, looking directly at Lila, "I love business structures, especially internal ones. Which account did the seed capital come from? The operating account or the trust? The silence that followed was absolute. My father finally looked up, his face pale and sweaty. "Sloan," he said, his voice trembling, "we are not here to talk about real estate. We need to discuss the estate, the family's protection." He reached under the table and pulled out a leather folder. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a standard non-disclosure and asset waiver," Dad said, reciting the words as if he had memorized a script. "Since grandfather is confused, and since you have your own company now, we need to separate the liabilities. This just states that you are financially independent and that you have not, and will not, access or utilize any Meridian Crest assets without explicit written board approval." I opened the folder. I scanned the legal jargon. It wasn't just a waiver. It was a retroactive confession. Clause 4 stated that the signatory acknowledged that any prior discrepancies in the family accounts were due to external system errors, and that the signatory accepted full responsibility for any digital intrusions originating from their personal devices. It was a frame job disguised as a contract. They wanted me to sign a document that essentially said, if money is missing, it was a computer error, and since I am the computer person, I take the hit. I closed the folder and slid it back. "I am not signing this," I said. "It is just a formality," Lila snapped, her voice rising. "Do not be difficult, Sloan. We are trying to protect the family name." "This does not protect the family," I said. "It protects you. I will have my lawyer in Denver look at it tomorrow." Lila stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped violently against the floor. "You always complicate everything. You think you are so smart with your little company and your arrogance. You have no idea what we are dealing with." "Lila, calm down," Dad pleaded, reaching for her hand. She snatched it away. "No, Daniel, she needs to understand." She turned to me, her eyes wild. "We are going to the guest house. Now, we are going to settle this privately, away from the staff." "Why the guest house?" I asked, though I already knew. The guest house had no staff, no witnesses. "Because I said so," Lila screamed. I followed them out into the cool night air. The path to the guest house was lined with solar lights that were dim and flickering. As we walked, I felt a strange sense of déjà vu. This was the moment Elias had warned me about. They were dragging me in. The fire was burning their feet. Inside the guest house, the air was musty. Lila didn't turn on the main lights. She flipped on the desk lamp and the hallway light, creating long, jagged shadows. She threw a new stack of papers onto the desk. The bank statements I had seen in my nightmares. The ones showing the missing $15 million. "We know you did it," Lila said, her voice dropping to a hiss. She was pacing now, a predator in a cage. "We had a forensic analyst look at the logs. The transfers happened at 2 a.m. The IP address bounced through a server in Denver. Your server, Sloan." I walked over to the papers. I looked at the evidence she had fabricated. It was pathetic. It was a printout of a generic server log that showed traffic coming from a Colorado region, stapled to the bank statement. "Lila," I said, holding up the page. "This is a trace route of a standard DNS query. This is not a bank transfer log. This just shows that someone in Colorado visited the bank's website. That could be anyone. That could be a VPN." "Stop lying." She slammed her hand on the desk. "You built a back door. You used that algorithm of yours to reroute the funds into your startup. That is how you grew so fast. You stole $15 million from your grandfather to fund your little trucking empire." "I did not touch the money," I said, my voice calm, anchoring myself against her hysteria. "And you know I didn't. I do not have the RSA token. I do not have the signature key." "You hacked it," she shrieked. She was closing the distance between us now. "You are the hacker. Admit it. Just sign the paper. Admit you took it as a loan, and we can fix the books before the audit on Monday." There it was, the timeline. The audit was Monday. They were out of time. "There is no loan, Lila," I said. The money is gone. You spent it. You funneled it into Harper's Shell Company in the Caribbean. I saw the structure. That was the spark. Lila lunged. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like a desperate woman watching her life crumble. She grabbed my shoulders and shoved me back. My hip checked the edge of the heavy oak desk, sending a jolt of pain down my leg. "Shut up," she screamed. "You ungrateful little wretch." She slapped me, hard. My head snapped to the side. The sting was immediate, hot and sharp. I tasted copper in my mouth. I didn't fight back. I let the momentum carry me. I stumbled, catching myself on the back of the armchair. My father was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of misery. "Sloane, please," he whimpered. "Just admit it. Just say you did it. We can hide it if you just say it was you. Lila can fix it." "He is right," Lila shouted, grabbing my arm and yanking me upright. She shook me, her nails digging into my skin through my blouse. "I can fix it, but I need a scapegoat. I cannot go to prison. Sloane, I have a reputation. You are nobody. You are just the stepdaughter. Nobody cares what happens to you." She raised her hand and hit me again, an open palm strike to the side of my head. My ear started to ring. "Sign the paper," she screamed, shoving the confession toward me. "Sign it." I fell back, allowing myself to collapse onto the floor near the wall. I was breathing hard, my cheek throbbing, my heart hammering against my ribs, but my mind was crystal clear. From my position on the floor, I looked up, high on the wall. Embedded in the decorative molding of the old grandfather clock was the eagle, and beneath the wing, the tiny red light was blinking. But something was different. The clock had been moved slightly to the left since I was a child, and the lens had been angled down. It wasn't pointing at the center of the room anymore. It was pointing exactly where I was sitting. Elias hadn't just watched. He had prepared the stage. He knew Lila would corner me. He knew she would get physical. He knew she would try to force a signature. I wiped a trickle of blood from the corner of my mouth. I looked at Lila, who was standing over me, chest heaving, hair wild. I looked at my father, the coward in the doorway. And then I looked at the red light. I pulled myself up to a sitting position, ensuring my face was fully illuminated by the desk lamp, ensuring the camera had a perfect view of the bruise forming on my cheek. "This is interesting," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the room's chaotic noise. "A person who has no access rights is being beaten into a confession by the person who holds the only digital key." Lila froze. "What?" "You are the trustee, Lila," I said, speaking for the record. "You are the only person in the world who can authorize a transfer over $10,000. You have the token. You have the password. You have the biometric ID. I, Lila stammered, confused by my sudden shift in tone. "You are asking me to confess to a crime that is technically impossible for me to commit," I continued, staring into the lens. "Unless, of course, you gave me your password? Is that what you're saying? Did you give me your credentials?" "No," Lila shouted. "I never gave you anything." "Then how did I move the money, Lila?" I asked softly. "How did I move $15 million without your fingerprint?" Lila stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She realized she had walked into a logic trap, but she didn't see the digital one yet. She snarled, a sound of pure frustration, and turned to my father. "Get the lawyer," she spat. "Get the police. I do not care anymore. Tell them she assaulted me. Tell them she was frantic. We will ruin her." She stormed out of the guest house. My father looked at me one last time, his eyes full of tears that meant absolutely nothing, and followed her. The heavy door slammed shut. The lock clicked. I was alone. The silence rushed back in, filling the space where Lila's screaming had been. My face burned. My hip throbbed. I felt small and battered. But as I sat there on the floor of my childhood playhouse, watching the red light blink, on, off, I felt a cold resolve harden in my chest. They thought they had trapped me. They thought they had cut off my escape. They thought violence would break me because they saw me as a child. But they had forgotten who built this room. They had forgotten who owned this house before they ever walked into it. If this was their trap, a locked door and a fabricated log file, then it was clumsy. It was amateur. I touched the USB drive in my pocket. "Where is your trap? Grandfather?" I thought, looking at the camera. "I am on my mark." I took the hit. Now, where is the cavalry? I leaned my head back against the wall and waited. The game of logistics was over. The war of attrition had just begun. The silence in the guest house was heavy, pressing against my eardrums like the crushing depth of the ocean. My face throbbed in time with my heartbeat, a hot, rhythmic reminder of Lila's hand connecting with my skin. I sat on the floor for what felt like an hour, just breathing, letting the adrenaline curdle into a cold, hard knot of resolve. Eventually, the cold from the hardwood floor seeped through my jeans, forcing me to move. I stood up, wincing as my hip protested, and walked over to the door. I expected it to be locked tight. I had heard the bolt slide home. I had heard the click of the tumblers. I reached out and turned the brass handle, fully expecting it to resist. It didn't. The latch gave way with a smooth, silent glide. The door drifted open a fraction of an inch, letting in a sliver of the cool night air. I froze, staring at the gap. Lila had made a show of locking me in. My father had stood right there and watched her do it. I pushed the door open a little further. The deadbolt was extended. Yes, but the door hadn't been pulled completely shut when she turned the key. The bolt had missed the striker plate by a millimeter, sliding harmlessly against the frame. It was a soft lock. A mistake? Lila didn't make mistakes with security. She was the kind of woman who double-checked the alarm codes before she went to sleep. "Close it, honey. You are letting the bugs in." The whisper came from the darkness of the porch. I jumped back, my heart hammering against my ribs, raising my hands defensively. A figure stepped out of the shadows of the hydrangea bushes. It wasn't Lila. It wasn't my father. It was Marcy. Marcy had been the housekeeper at the Mercer estate since before I was born. She was 60-something, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and a uniform that always smelled faintly of lavender and starch. She was part of the furniture to people like Lila. Invisible, silent, functional. But to me, she had been the one who sneaked me grilled cheese sandwiches when I was sent to my room without dinner. "Marcy?" I breathed, lowering my hands. "Did you unlock the door?" "I did not touch it," she whispered, stepping quickly inside and closing the door behind her. She engaged the lock properly this time, then turned to face me. Her eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Mr. Daniel did. I saw him. He pulled the door to, but he kept his thumb on the latch just long enough so the bolt wouldn't catch. He looked like he was going to be sick." My father, a tiny, pathetic act of rebellion. He couldn't stop his wife from beating me, but he couldn't quite bring himself to jail me. It was almost more insulting than the slap. "Why are you here, Marcy?" I asked. "If Lila catches you..." "Mrs. Mercer is in the main house, pouring herself a very large vodka," Marcy said, her voice sharp with disapproval. "And Mr. Elias told me to be here." "Grandfather?" Marcy nodded. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, magnetized key. She walked over to the large oil painting of a hunting scene that hung on the far wall, the only piece of old decor Lila hadn't stripped out, probably because she thought it looked aristocratic. Marcy pressed the key against the bottom right corner of the frame. There was a soft mechanical whir, and the painting swung outward on concealed hinges. Behind it wasn't a safe. It was a server rack, a small, high-end, military-grade solid-state drive recording unit. It was blinking with the same rhythmic red pulse as the camera in the clock. "Mr. Elias had the contractors install this 5 years ago when they redid the wiring," Marcy explained, her fingers flying over the interface with surprising familiarity. "He told me, 'Marcy, if they ever put Sloan in the guest house, you go there immediately, you check the feed, and you make sure it is backed up.'" He knew, I realized, moving to stand beside her. He knew it would end here. He knows people, Marcy corrected. He knows that Mrs. Mercer runs out of patience faster than she runs out of money. On the small screen embedded in the unit, I saw the playback. The timestamp was from 20 minutes ago. The video was crystal clear. High-definition audio and video. I watched myself standing by the desk. I watched Lila lunge. I saw the impact of her hand, the way my head snapped back. I heard the sickening sound of the slap, loud and crisp in the silence of the room. I heard her screaming about the money. I heard my father begging me to confess. It wasn't just evidence. It was a smoking gun. "It is completely independent," Marcy said. "It is on a closed circuit. No Wi-Fi, no Bluetooth. Lila's security team does not even know this exists because it draws power from the emergency generator line." She ejected a small cartridge from the drive and handed it to me. "Here, this is the master copy. The system will keep recording on the internal loop, but this is yours." Then, she reached into her other pocket and pulled out a silver USB drive. It looked exactly like the one Elias had given me in the hotel room in Denver, but this one had a small piece of red tape on the end. "He said to give you this only if they started blaming you for the money," Marcy said, pressing it into my palm. He said, "Tell Sloan to look at the root." I moved to the desk and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from anticipation. I plugged in the USB drive. I bypassed the encryption with the password Elias had taught me years ago. The coordinates of the first piece of land he ever bought. The folder opened. It contained a single, massive spreadsheet, a transaction log from the bank. I scanned the columns, my eyes adjusting to the data format. It was the history of the missing $15 million. I traced the timestamps. The money had left the trust account in 3 large tranches over the last 2 weeks. The destination account was a shell company called Azure Horizon Logistics, based in the Cayman Islands. I frowned. Logistics? Lila wasn't just stealing. She was trying to be clever. She had named the shell company something that sounded like my industry. She was trying to create a narrative fit. I clicked deeper into the metadata of the transfers. The transaction notes referenced supply chain optimization fees and proprietary routing software licensing. I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. They weren't just framing me, they were mimicking me. The structure of the transfers, the way the money was broken up, the timing of the wires to coincide with international market closures. It was a crude copy of the routing algorithms I used for FlowGrid. Lila, or whoever she hired, had studied my company. They had looked at how I moved data and tried to move cash the same way, thinking that if anyone looked, they would say, "Oh, that looks like Sloane's handwriting." But it was too perfect. It was robotic. Real logistics has friction. It has variance. This was a clean mathematical copy. And then I saw the destination. From the Cayman account, the money didn't stay put. It was immediately wired to a corporate entity in Miami called Gilded Palm Developments. I quickly opened a new tab and ran a search on Gilded Palm Developments. The corporate registry was opaque, but I cross-referenced the registered agent address with the papers I had seen earlier at dinner, the ones Harper had been bragging about. Harper & Co. The $15 million hadn't been stolen by a hacker. It had been laundered through a fake logistics company to look like I took it, and then deposited straight into Harper's vanity real estate project. Lila had gutted the family trust to fund her daughter's beach villas. "Unbelievable," I whispered. She used my own logic against me. "Is it bad?" Marcy asked, hovering over my shoulder. "It is perfect," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. She thinks she was being smart. She copied my routing style, but she forgot one thing. Every digital transfer leaves a footprint of origin. She can fake the destination. She can fake the style, but she cannot fake where the button was pushed. I pulled up the IP logs included in the USB drive. Grandfather had evidently had the bank track the origin point in real time. The requests didn't come from Denver. They didn't come from a VPN. They came from a static IP address ending in 1104. I knew that address. I had set up the network in this house when I was 18. That was the dedicated line for the master study. Lila's office. She hadn't even bothered to go to a coffee shop. She had stolen $15 million while sitting in her bathrobe upstairs. I needed a witness, not a family member, a professional. I pulled up my encrypted chat application and dialed Arlo Pierce. Arlo was a shark of a lawyer based in Denver. He had helped me incorporate Flowgrid when I was nobody, and he had stuck with me because he liked billing me for his expensive scotch. He was also the best digital privacy attorney in the state. He answered on the second ring. "Mercer, it is 2 a.m. You better be in jail or rich." "I am working on both," I said. "Arlo, I am sending you a packet. I need you to look at the IP headers on the transaction logs." I dragged the files into the chat window. "There is a video file coming too. Do not open that one yet. Just look at the money." I heard the clicking of his keyboard. Silence stretched for a long minute. "Holy Mother of God," Arlo breathed. 15 million? Sloan, this signature is cleaner than a whistle. This did not come from an external hack. The handshakes are all internal. This came from a trusted device on the local network, and the digital signature. It is using a trustee key. "Can you prove it wasn't me?" I asked. "Sloan, at the time of these transfers, your cell phone pinged a tower in downtown Denver. I can pull your credit card usage for that night. You bought gas at a station on Colfax Avenue 7 minutes after the second wire went out. Unless you have the power of bilocation, you are clear. This points directly to whoever was sitting at the desk in Mapleton." "Good," I said. "Arlo, listen to me. I am going to be offline for a few hours. If I do not check in by noon tomorrow, you send everything to the FBI. But not yet. I want to see how far they dig this hole." "You are playing a dangerous game, kid," Arlo warned. "These people are desperate. I see the amounts. They are underwater on this real estate thing. Desperate people bite." "I know." I touched my cheek. "I have the marks to prove it." I hung up. I turned to Marcy. "Where is grandfather now?" "He is in his suite," Marcy said. "Lila told the nurse to give him a sedative to help him sleep through the stress of the family reunion. But Mr. Elias didn't take it. He spat it into his napkin. He is sitting in his armchair with his tablet." "Can I talk to him?" "He said you might ask." Marcy pulled her phone out of her apron. "We have to be quick. Lila monitors the Wi-Fi, but this is on cellular." She dialed a number and held the phone up, turning the screen toward me. The video quality was grainy, illuminated only by the blue light of a screen reflecting off an old man's face. Elias looked frail. His skin was like parchment, his eyes sunken, but when he saw me, a spark of intense, terrifying intelligence lit up his gaze. "Sloan," he rasped. His voice was barely a whisper. "I saw the route, grandfather," I said. "I saw where the money went. Azure Horizon, Harper's Villas." Elias nodded slowly. "A clumsy route, too many stops, high friction." "They beat me. Grandfather," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Lila, she hit me." Elias's face tightened. For a second, he looked like he might smash the tablet. The anger was raw and visceral, but he inhaled deeply, forcing the rage down, channeling it into focus. "The bruise is a badge. Sloan," he said. "It is the physical proof of their bankruptcy, moral and financial. Do not hide it. Wear it like war paint." "What do we do?" I asked. "I have Arlo ready to go to the authorities." "No," Elias commanded. "Not yet. The authorities are a hammer. We need a scalpel. Tomorrow. Lila will try to end this. She will call a meeting. She will bring in her lawyers to force you to sign. She thinks she has you cornered in the Guesthouse." He leaned closer to the screen. "Have you seen the route of the 15 million? Really seen it?" "Yes, it is sitting in a holding account for Gilded Palm." "Then let them run it," Elias said. "Do not block the transaction. Do not freeze the account. Let them think the money has successfully landed. Let them feel safe. Let them think the theft is complete." "Why?" "Because you cannot trap a fox if it is still standing outside the coop," Elias whispered. "You have to let it inside. You have to let it hold the chicken in its mouth. That is when you close the door." He paused, coughing slightly. I have prepared the road signs. Sloan, the bank is watching, the board is watching. Tomorrow, when she tries to bury you, you are going to turn on the lights. I understand, I said. Stay in the guest house, Elias ordered. Let them come to you. This is your territory now. It is full of eyes. The screen went black. Marcy tucked the phone away. I have to go back, she said, before they notice I'm gone. Thank you, Marcy, I said. She paused at the door, looking back at me. Your mother would be proud of you. Sloan, not because you are smart, but because you are fighting. She slipped out into the night, locking the door behind her, this time truly locking it, so Lila would suspect nothing. I was alone again. I sat down at the desk and opened a new file on my laptop. I began to compile the timeline, the video of the slap, the bank logs, the IP traces, the text messages Arlo was pulling. I worked through the night. I didn't sleep. I didn't feel pain. I felt like I was back at Iron Route, staring at a map of a city in chaos, drawing the one single line that would make sense of it all. Lila thought she was the queen of this castle. She thought she could beat me into submission and steal my inheritance to fund her daughter's fantasy life. She didn't realize that she wasn't the client anymore. She was the cargo, and I was about to route her straight off a cliff. I looked up at the blinking red light one last time. Copy that, grandfather, I whispered. Route confirmed. I sat there in the dim light of the guest house, the adrenaline from the physical altercation slowly morphing into a cold, cerebral focus. The USB drive Marcy had given me was plugged into my laptop, humming with the silent energy of 1,000 buried secrets. I clicked on a file named The Route. It wasn't a spreadsheet this time. It was a video file, recorded 2 weeks ago. I put my headphones in, wincing as the earbud pressed against the side of my face where Lila had struck me. The screen flickered, and there was Elias. He was sitting in his study, not the sunroom where he played the invalid. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit, holding a glass of scotch. Neat. Just the way he liked it before the doctors told him to stop. He looked straight into the camera lens, his eyes clear and predatory. Sloan, the recording began. His voice was strong, lacking the tremor he affected around Lila. If you are watching this, it means the money has moved. It means Lila finally worked up the courage, or the desperation, to make the transfer she has been practicing for 3 years. I leaned closer. 3 years? I have known. Of course, Elias continued, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. I knew when she took $50,000 for roof repairs. That never happened in 2021. I knew when she siphoned $100,000 for a charity gala that had no guest list. I let her take it. You do not trap a rat by sealing the hole the moment it sniffs the cheese. You wait until the whole body is inside. He took a sip, savoring it. But this time, the number is different. $15 million. That is not petty cash. That is the capital required to kill a company or save a life. She thinks she was clever. She thinks because I'm an old man who drools into his napkin that I did not notice the liquidity request forms she slipped into my signing stack. But I saw them, and I made a call. Elias leaned forward, the camera focusing on the intensity of his gaze. I called the bank's fraud department the morning the request came in. I told them to authorize the transfer. I told them to let the money leave the Meridian Crest Family Trust. I told them to let it hit the wire. My breath caught in my throat. He let it happen? But, Elias said, holding up a finger, I had them attach a digital marker to the transaction ID. In banking terms, it is a conditional release subject to verification. Legally, the money has left our house, but it has not officially arrived at her destination. It is hanging in the air. It is in the gray zone. It is a ghost transaction. He picked up a document from his desk and held it up to the camera. It was a thick legal contract with blue tabs. And this, he said, is where the trap snaps shut. This is a venture capital investment agreement. It is dated 3 days before the transfer. It lists the Meridian Crest Family Trust as the investor and Flowgrid Route Holdings as the recipient. I froze, Flowgrid, my company? The terms are specific, Elias explained. The agreement states that any funds removed from the trust under suspicion of fraud or unauthorized access up to the amount of $20 million are automatically reclassified not as a loss, but as a high-risk capital injection into your company. Sloan, the moment a court, or a board of directors, acknowledges that the $15 million was moved improperly, that money does not go back to the trust to be stolen again. It legally becomes yours. It becomes equity. I stared at the screen, my mouth slightly open. He hadn't just protected the money. He had weaponized it. He had built a legal bridge that turned Lila's theft into my funding. If she successfully stole the money, she was technically just acting as a courier delivering capital to the stepdaughter she hated. It is a nice piece of irony, isn't it? Elias said, a dry smile touching his lips. She does the work. You get the profit. The video cut to a new angle. Elias was now holding a different document. Now about the will, he said, his tone darkening. Lila has been trying to get me to change it for months. She wants control. She wants to cut you out. So, I let her believe I was considering it. I let her draft new versions. I even let her see fake drafts where I leave everything to Harper. It made her sloppy. It made her confident. He slammed the document down on the desk. But this is the real one. It was filed with the state probate court 6 months ago. Sealed under a privacy order. It contains a bad actor clause. It states that any beneficiary who is found to have caused intentional financial loss to the estate in excess of $5 million, whether through theft, fraud, or gross negligence, is immediately and permanently disinherited. No appeals, no trusts. They get nothing. Zero. My heart hammered against my ribs. $15 million was well over the $5 million threshold. By moving that money, Lila hadn't just committed a crime. She had erased herself and Harper from the legacy. And the primary beneficiary, Elias said, looking softly into the camera, is you, Sloan. But there is a condition. You cannot have dirty hands. You cannot be part of the scheme. That is why I sent you away. That is why I let you struggle. I needed you to be clean. I needed your money to be made from sweat, not schemes. He paused, looking tired for a moment, the mask of the strong patriarch slipping just a fraction. I am afraid. Sloan, he confessed, his voice dropping. Not of dying, but of leaving this family to wolves who do not know how to hunt. Lila thinks wealth is a right. Harper thinks it is a magic trick. You are the only one who knows it is just fuel. You put it in the tank, and you drive the car. Do not let them wreck the car. I will not, I whispered to the screen. Do not run away tonight, Elias ordered, his voice regaining its steel. I know you want to. I know you want to go back to Denver and let the lawyers handle it. Do not stay in the guest house. Let them think they have you trapped. Let them think they have won. Because when a predator thinks the prey is cornered, they stop looking at their surroundings. And that corner, that is where my camera sees best. The video ended with a sharp click. The screen went black. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the room feeling different now. It wasn't empty silence. It was the silence of a loaded gun. I picked up my phone. It was 3 a.m, but I knew Arlo would be awake. I sent him a text via our encrypted app. Me, deploy the buoy. Arlo, you sure? Once it is out, we cannot pull it back. Me, grandfather built the bridge. I'm just opening the toll booth. Do it. The plan was simple but devastating. Arlo, acting as an external counsel for a concerned anonymous stakeholder, would trigger a notification to the bank's compliance officer, the bank, seeing the flag Elias had already placed, would issue a formal risk of forfeiture notice to the Meridian Crest Board of Directors. The notice wouldn't accuse anyone. It would simply state that $15 million was in a contested status and that all accounts would be frozen within 48 hours unless the board could verify the transaction's legitimacy in person. This would panic Lila. She couldn't verify it because the paperwork was fake. She couldn't ignore it because the accounts would freeze, and her Caribbean deal would collapse. Her only option would be to hold an emergency board meeting immediately, and since she needed to control the narrative, she wouldn't do it at the corporate headquarters in the city. She would do it here, in the privacy of the estate. She would bring the board members here, to the guest house, to the scene of the crime, hoping to bully me into taking the fall in front of them, to close the loop before the 48 hours ran out. She would bring the entire conspiracy into a room that was rigged with microphones. I closed the laptop and stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the main house. The lights were still on in the master bedroom. Lila was probably up there right now, celebrating. She probably had a glass of champagne in her hand, thinking about the beach villas, thinking about how easy it had been to slap the stepdaughter into silence. I touched the glass, my reflection staring back at me. A bruise was blooming on my cheekbone, dark and purple. "You should have checked the map, Lila," I whispered. I went back to the desk and pulled up the 2 images on my screen again. On the left was the route of the stolen money, the complex web of shell companies, offshore jumps, and digital transfers Lila had constructed. On the right was a route map I had designed for a client in Ohio last year, a distribution network for a chain of auto parts stores. I overlaid them. They were identical. The timing of the jumps matched the traffic patterns I used to avoid rush hour. The shell companies were placed at the exact logistical nodes where I usually placed distribution hubs. The fees she paid to the offshore banks were calculated using the same percentage variable I used for fuel surcharges. She hadn't just stolen the money. She had stolen my intellectual property to do it. She had looked at my work she called tech nonsense, and used it as a blueprint for a felony. She thought she was mocking me. She thought she was being ironic, but she had made a fatal error. When you use someone else's code, you inherit their bugs, but you also inherit their back doors. And I knew exactly where the back door in this route was. I smiled, a cold, sharp expression that hurt my bruised face. "They used my language to speak to the bank," I said to the empty room. "They forgot that I am the one who wrote the dictionary." I lay down on the small, dusty sofa in the corner of the guest house. I didn't sleep. I watched the red light on the clock blink. Tick, tock, tick, tock. It wasn't counting time anymore. It was counting down the hours until the board meeting. Tomorrow, the guest house wouldn't be a prison. It would be a theater. And I had the best seat in the house. The notice from the bank arrived at 9 in the morning, delivered by a courier who looked far too cheerful for a man carrying a death sentence for the Mercer family reputation. It was a formal risk of forfeiture letter, stating in polite but absolute terms that the $15 million transaction flagged as suspicious had triggered a compliance hold. Unless the origin of the funds could be verified by the trustees in person within 48 hours, the entire Meridian Crest Family Trust would be frozen. For Harper, this was not just an administrative headache, it was an apocalypse. Her credit lines for the Caribbean project were collateralized against the trust. If the trust froze, her loans would default before the cement was even dry on her first villa. Lila managed the panic the way she managed everything else, with aggressive hospitality. By noon, she had summoned an emergency advisory council. She called in 3 members of the Meridian Crest board, men my grandfather had worked with for decades, men who now looked at Lila with a mixture of suspicion and fatigue. She also summoned the family's private attorney, a shark named Mr. Sterling, whose hourly rate could feed a family of 4 for a month. I watched the cars pull up from the window of the guest house, black Mercedes, silver Lexus, the parade of the concerned elite. Lila's plan was transparent. She couldn't solve the bank's problem because the paperwork was fake. So, she needed a fall guy. She needed to present the board with a rogue actor who had manipulated the accounts. If she could get me to confess, or at least look guilty enough, she could tell the bank. "We found the hacker. We are reversing the damage. Please keep the credit lines open." Harper had spent the morning hysterical. I heard later from Marcy. She had been shrieking that I was jealous, that I used my creepy computer company to sabotage her big break. She convinced Lila that painting me as a sophisticated cybercriminal was the only way out. After all, who would believe that Lila, who struggled to convert a PDF, could orchestrate a complex offshore routing scheme. But Sloan? Sloan ran a logistics tech firm. Sloan was the perfect villain. I dressed for the execution carefully, no power suit, no armor. I wore jeans and a simple white sweater. I pulled my hair back. I didn't put on makeup to hide the bruise on my cheek. I let it sit there, purple and ugly, a silent testament to the negotiation tactics used the night before. I walked into the main house carrying only my laptop and a thin manila envelope. The living room was tense. My father, Daniel, sat in the corner, nursing a scotch that he was drinking far too quickly. The board members, Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Vance, and Mr. Gao, were sitting on the stiff sofas, looking at their watches. Lila was standing by the fireplace, radiating a manic energy. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Lila said, her voice pitching slightly too high. "We have a situation, a security breach." She looked at me as I entered. Her eyes were hard, promising pain if I deviated from the script she had undoubtedly rehearsed in her head. "Sloan," she said, her tone dripping with fake disappointment, "I am glad you decided to join us." "I live here, Lila," I said softly. "For now." Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, stood up. He smoothed his tie. "Mrs. Mercer, perhaps we should move this discussion to a more private setting. The staff?" He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen where Marcy was pretending to dust. Lila's eyes lit up. "Yes, excellent idea. The guest house. It is quiet there. No prying ears." I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. She was doing it. She was walking the entire board of directors, the lawyer, and my father right into the trap Elias had built. She thought the guest house was her interrogation room. She had no idea it was a broadcast studio. We processed across the lawn like a funeral march. The air was crisp, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows that stretched toward the guest house. Inside, the air was still heavy with the memory of last night's violence. Lila ushered everyone in, arranging the chairs in a semicircle facing the desk. She placed me in the wooden chair in the center, like the accused in a witch trial. "We are here," Mr. Sterling began, opening a briefcase, "because of a serious anomaly in the trust accounts. $15 million has been moved without proper authorization. The bank has flagged this as potential fraud." He pulled out a stack of papers, the same fabricated logs Lila had thrown at me the night before. "Our internal investigation," Sterling continued, glancing at Lila for approval, "suggests that a sophisticated routing algorithm was used to bypass the standard security protocols. This algorithm bears a striking resemblance to the proprietary software used by certain logistics companies." He looked at me over his glasses. "Miss Mercer, your company, Flowgrid, specializes in automated routing, does it not?" I sat with my hands folded in my lap. I didn't speak. I just looked at him. "Sloan," Lila interjected, stepping forward, "this is not the time for games. We know you have the technical skills. We know you were angry about being cut off. Just tell the board what you did. Tell them you were trying to prove a point? To show us security flaws?" She was offering me a lifeline that was actually a noose. If I admitted to testing the security, I was admitting to the act. I remained silent. I looked at the board members. Mr. Henderson was frowning, looking from me to Lila. He looked uncomfortable. "Sloan," my father spoke up, his voice sounding wet. "Please, if you just explain how you did it, we can fix it. We do not want to see you in legal trouble." Poor Dad. He was trapped in a hell of his own making. If he believed I was innocent, he had to accept that he had allowed his wife to loot his father's legacy. If he believed I was guilty, he had to throw his own daughter to the wolves to save his wife's skin. He had chosen the path of least resistance, as always. "I am confused," I said finally, my voice calm and clear. "Mr. Sterling, you said the money was moved using an algorithm?" "Yes," Sterling said, pointing to the papers. "A complex series of transfers designed to mask the destination." "And where did the money go?" I asked. Sterling hesitated. The destination is currently obscured by the routing, but we believe it is sitting in a holding account controlled by the perpetrator. It went to the Caribbean, Harper blurted out from the back of the room. Everyone turned to look at her. Harper's face flushed red. She realized she had spoken too soon. She stammered. Mom said, we heard it might have gone offshore, like, to hide it. The Caribbean, I repeated, nodding slowly. That is specific. Is it a general account? Harper? Or is it for a specific project? Stop it, Lila snapped. This is not about Harper. This is about you. Sloan, you hacked the system. You used your laptop. We have the logs of you logging in at 2 a.m. 2 a.m, I said, looking at Mr. Gao, the most senior board member. That is interesting, because at 2 a.m. on that date, the Meridian Crest system undergoes its nightly server maintenance. No external logins are permitted. Only the local administrator console in the master study is active. Lila froze. She didn't know that. She didn't know the technical details of the system she was pretending to protect. Well, Lila fumbled, her face flushing pink. Maybe you bypassed the maintenance. You are the expert. That is why you did it then. To hide. Or, I said, leaning back, the person who moved the money did it from the master study, from the hardline. That is ridiculous, Lila laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. I was asleep. Daniel was asleep. Why would I steal my own money? It is not your money, Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Henderson said quietly from the sofa. It is the trust's money, and under the bylaws, any transfer over $1 million requires dual signatures, yours and Elias's. Elias signed it, Lila said quickly, too quickly. He signed the authorization forms weeks ago. He told me to move some assets to diversify. I executed the order. Wait, Mr. Gao said, leaning forward. You just said Sloan hacked it. Now you are saying Elias authorized it? The room went deadly silent. Lila looked like a deer caught in headlights. She had tripped over her own lie. She had spent 20 minutes building a narrative that I was a cyber criminal, and in one moment of defensive panic, she had pivoted to claiming it was a legitimate authorized transfer. Lila stammered. Elias wanted to move money, but Sloan intercepted it. She hijacked the transfer and routed it somewhere else, to her company, to Flowgrid. My company? I raised an eyebrow. So now the money is at Flowgrid? Yes, Lila shouted, seizing the idea. That is where it is. You stole it to fund your failing startup. Actually, Harper cut in again, her voice rising in panic. The money has to be in the Azure Horizon account. It has to be. The closing is tomorrow. Mom, if the money is not there, I lose the deposit. The silence that followed was deafening. Harper had just admitted that the destination of the stolen funds was critical to her personal business deal. My father put his head in his hands. He groaned, a low, pained sound. Daniel? Mr. Henderson asked, looking at my father with pity and disgust. Did you know about this? Did you know $15 million was being moved to a Caribbean real estate venture? Dad looked up, his eyes pleading with Lila to give him the answer. I knew there was an investment opportunity. Lila handles the details. I trust her judgment. You trust her judgment? Mrs. Vance, the third board member, spoke for the first time. Her voice was icy. Daniel, this is $15 million of liquid capital. You are telling us you let your wife move that kind of volume without reading the prospectus? Without knowing the destination? He did not need to know, Lila shrieked. He is the husband. I am the trustee. I have the power of attorney. Not for self-dealing, Mr. Sterling, her own lawyer, muttered. He was starting to close his briefcase. I could see him mentally calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. Lila looked around the room. She saw the board members exchanging looks. She saw the lawyer backing away. She saw her control slipping like sand through her fingers. She turned on me. Her eyes were wild, desperate. She needed to crush me. She needed to make me the villain so badly that truth didn't matter anymore. "This is all your fault," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You and your jealousy. You could not stand that Harper was successful. You could not stand that we were happy. So you set this up. You confused your grandfather. You messed with the computer." She walked over to me, looming over the chair. "Admit it. Sloan, tell them you did it. Tell them you hacked the account so we can file the insurance claim and fix this. Do it for your father. Do not destroy this family." I looked up at her. I looked at the bruise on my cheek that she had put there. I looked at the tiny red light on the clock behind her, blinking steadily, capturing every frame of her breakdown, every word of her confession, every contradiction. The trap was full. The fox was in the coop. The door was closed. "I cannot admit to something I did not do, Lila," I said, "and I think the board has heard enough to understand what really happened." "They have heard nothing but your lies," Lila spat. "You have no proof. It is your word against mine. And I am the Mercer. I am the one with the name." "Actually," I said, reaching into my bag, I pulled out the HDMI cable connected to the large flat-screen TV mounted on the wall, the one Lila had installed to watch her lifestyle shows while she pretended to work in the guest house. "I have a little more than my word," I said. I plugged the cable into my laptop. The big screen flickered to life. "What are you doing?" Lila demanded. "Put that away." "You wanted to talk about the route, Lila," I said, my voice hardening. "You wanted to talk about algorithms and logistics, so let's look at the map." I hit a key. The screen filled with a graphic. It wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a visual map of the money's journey, generated by Flowgrid's tracking software. It showed the origin point, the master study, Mapleton Estate. It showed the time, 2:14 a.m. It showed the user credentials, Lila Admin. And then, it showed the path. It showed the bouncing through the shell companies. It showed the final destination, Gilded Palm Developments. But then, I pressed another key. A second window opened on the screen. It was the video file from last night. The room gasped. On the screen, giant and high definition, was Lila. She was screaming. She was shaking me. And then, in brutal, undeniable clarity, she slapped me across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the guest house, louder than the real thing had been, amplified by the surround sound speakers. "I will cover for you," the digital Lila screamed on the screen. "Just sign it." I paused the video right on the frame where her hand was making contact with my face. I stood up. I wasn't the victim in the chair anymore. I was the prosecutor. "This was last night," I said to the stunned room. "In this room, while you," I pointed to my father, "stood in the doorway and watched." Lila stared at the screen, her face draining of all color. She looked like a ghost. She looked at the TV, then at me, then at the blinking red light on the clock, which she finally noticed. "You," she whispered. "You asked me to save the family image," I said, looking her dead in the eye. I am cutting out the rot." I turned to the board members. $15 million is gone," I said, "but I know exactly where it is, and I have the legal key to bring it back. But first, we need to talk about who is driving the truck." I hit play again. The movie wasn't over. We were just getting to the good part. The glowing screen of the television was the only source of warmth in the room, casting long, harsh shadows against the faces of the people who had assembled to destroy me. I stood next to the display, feeling less like a defendant and more like a professor teaching a class on corporate malfeasance. "What you are looking at," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension, "are two distinct data sets. On the left side of the screen was a map of the Midwest, covered in a spiderweb of blue lines. It was a visual representation of a supply chain optimization I had designed for a regional grocery client 3 months ago. The blue lines represent the distribution of perishable goods," I explained, gesturing to the complex nodes. "We use a multi-stop algorithm to reduce fuel consumption and avoid toll roads. It is designed to look chaotic to the naked eye to prevent competitors from predicting our routes, but mathematically, it is the most efficient path between 2 points. I hit a key on my laptop. A second map appeared on the right side of the screen. This one was global. It showed lines of bright, angry red stretching from Ohio to Delaware, then bouncing to the Cayman Islands, and finally landing in a corporate account in Miami. The red lines, I continued, looking directly at Mr. Henderson, the board member who understood numbers best, represent the movement of $15 million out of the Meridian Crest Family Trust over the last 14 days. The room was silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to have paused to listen. Now, watch what happens when I overlay them. I pressed the enter key. The red map slid over the blue map. They did not just align, they snapped together like puzzle pieces. The timing of the transfers matched the timing of the truck departures. The percentage of the fees deducted at each offshore stop matched exactly the fuel surcharge coefficients I had written into my software code. The holding times in the shell accounts were identical to the driver rest periods mandated by federal law. This is the same map, I said. Someone in this house did not just steal the money. They stole my logic to do it. They used the flow grid routing structure to create a laundering scheme, thinking that by copying a logistics pattern, they could hide the digital footprint. They thought they were saving trace logs, just like I save diesel. Mr. Henderson stood up and walked closer to the screen. He adjusted his glasses, tracing the lines with a trembling finger. "It is a mirror image," he whispered. "The variables are identical." Lila let out a scoff that sounded like glass breaking in a garbage disposal. "Oh, please," she sneered, waving her hand dismissively, though I could see the tremor in her fingers. "This is ridiculous. These are just lines on a screen. Sloane drew some pretty pictures to confuse you. It proves nothing except that she has too much free time." "You want more than pictures, Lila?" I asked. "Fine. Let's look at the metadata." I minimized the maps and opened the next file from grandfather's USB drive. It was a raw server log from the bank, authorized by the security token Elias held. Lines of code cascaded down the screen, settling into a clear, undeniable table of events. "This is the access log for the initial transfer," I said, pointing to the first entry. Date, October 14th. Time, 2:14 in the morning. Location, Mapleton Estate. Master study. Device ID, MCAdmin01. I turned to the board. MCAdmin01 is the hardwired terminal in Lila's home office. It does not have wireless capability. To execute this command, you have to be physically sitting in the chair. "That proves nothing," Lila shouted, her voice rising an octave. "IP addresses can be spoofed. You are a hacker. Sloane, you could have routed your signal through my computer to frame me." "That is a valid theory," I conceded, nodding as if I were considering it. "Remote access Trojans exist, but there is a problem with your timeline, Lila." I pulled up a calendar entry on the screen next to the log. "On October 14th, you told the family you were at a wellness retreat in Sedona. You claimed you had no cell service. You claimed you were completely off the grid." I clicked another file. It was a security camera still from the hallway outside the master study. The timestamp read October 14th, 2:12 in the morning. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It showed Lila, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of wine, walking into the study. "Unless you have discovered teleportation," I said, "you were not in Sedona. You were upstairs, initiating the first $5 million transfer." The room erupted. Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, dropped his pen. "Mrs. Vance gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Harper looked at the screen, her eyes wide with horror, realizing that her mother's alibi had just evaporated. That is a deep fake," Lila shrieked. She was backing away now, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "She made it. She used AI. You cannot trust anything on that screen." "You can trust the audio," I said. I closed the images. The screen went black for a second. "Lila says I hacked the account," I said to the room. She says I stole her credentials. She says she had no idea how the money moved. I hit the spacebar. The speakers in the guest house crackled, and then Lila's voice filled the room. It wasn't the polished, socialite voice she used for the board. It was the raw, guttural scream of the woman who had slapped me the night before. I am the trustee, Lila, my recorded voice said calmly. You are the only person in the world who can authorize a transfer over $10,000. Did you give me your credentials? Then, Lila's voice, loud and clear, dripping with arrogance. No, I never gave you anything. And then, the kill shot. The line she had uttered in her rage, thinking no one but a battered stepdaughter was listening. I sign everything. You think I don't know the route the money takes? Wait, I paused. The translation in my head corrected itself. The audio played in English, but the intent was universal. I sign everything. You think I do not know the route of the money? The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Lila stood frozen. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She looked at the board members, who were staring at her with a mixture of shock and revulsion. She had just admitted, on tape, that she knew the route, that she signed the orders. That, Lila whispered, her voice trembling. That was taken out of context. I was under duress. She provoked me. And here is the best part, I said, turning to face her. That recording is not just on this laptop. The moment the microphone in the clock captured it, the file was automatically encrypted and emailed to 2 external contacts. I looked at Mr. Sterling. Check your inbox. Counselor, you should have received a file from Guesthouse Security about 3 hours ago. Sterling pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen, his face paling. I have it. It is here. And the second recipient, I said, was a contact labeled EP. EP? Daniel asked, his voice barely audible. Elias P. Mercer, I said. At that exact moment, the sound of the guest house door opening shattered the tension. We all turned. Marcy was there, pushing a wheelchair, and in that wheelchair sat the man who was supposed to be senile, the man who was supposed to be asleep in a drug-induced haze. Grandfather Elias sat upright. He was wearing his favorite smoking jacket. His hair was combed. In his hands, he held a tablet that was glowing with the same interface I had on the big screen. He didn't look weak. He looked like a king returning to reclaim his throne. Father? Daniel breathed, standing up. You are awake? I have been awake for a very long time, Daniel, Elias said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of 40 years of boardroom dominance. While you were sleeping through the theft of your inheritance, Lila looked at him with pure terror. Elias, I can explain. Sloan, she manipulated the data. Be quiet, Lila, Elias said. He didn't shout. He just issued the command, and Lila's mouth snapped shut. Marcy pushed him to the center of the room. He looked at the big screen, at the maps, at the logs. Then he looked at me. There was no smile, just a curt nod of respect. I confirmed the transaction, Elias announced to the board members. The moment the request for $15 million came from the master study, the bank alerted me. I did not stop it. I flagged it. You let it go? Mr. Henderson asked, confused. I marked it as subject to fraud investigation, Elias said, and I attached a conditional clause to the transfer, a legal failsafe. He tapped his tablet, and a new document appeared on the big screen. It was a contract I had never seen before, but my name was all over it. This, Elias said, is a venture capital agreement between the Meridian Crest Family Trust and Flowgrid Route Holdings. It states that in the event of any unauthorized removal of funds by a trustee, specifically Lila Mercer, those funds are immediately reclassified as a high-risk equity investment into Sloan's company. The room gasped. What? Harper cried out. No, that is my money. That is for the villas. Not anymore, Elias said, turning his cold gaze to his step-granddaughter. If this board concludes that fraud occurred, and the audio recording makes that conclusion inevitable, then the $15 million sitting in your Caribbean shell account does not belong to you. It belongs to Flowgrid. It is legally Sloane's capital now. You cannot do that, Harper screamed, tears streaming down her face. She turned to Lila, grabbing her mother's arm. You said it was safe. You said you fixed it. You said if I signed the papers, the money was mine. You made me sign them. Harper, shut up, Lila hissed, trying to shake her off. No, Harper shouted, backing away. I am not going to jail for you. She made me set up the company. She used my name on the incorporation papers because she said she couldn't use hers. She said it was a tax loop. She used your name, I said quietly, to launder the money. She set you up as the fall guy. Harper, if the bank traced it, the trail would end at you, not her. Harper looked at her mother with absolute betrayal. Lila didn't deny it. She just looked furious that her pawn was talking. Mr. Gao stood up. He was the chairman of the governance committee. He looked at Lila with the expression one reserves for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. We have a clause, Mr. Gao said, his voice shaking with suppressed anger. The bad actor provision in the estate bylaws. We amended it 6 months ago at Elias's request. He looked at Daniel, then at Lila. Any beneficiary who causes intentional financial harm to the estate in excess of $5 million forfeits all rights to inheritance, all trusts, all stipends, all executive positions, effective immediately. Daniel! Lila screamed, turning to my father. Do something! They are stealing our future. Tell them it was a mistake. My father stood there, swaying slightly. He looked at the wife who had dominated him for a decade. He looked at the daughter she had brought into his home. And then he looked at me, the daughter he had exiled, the daughter standing next to the evidence of his own cowardice. Daniel looked at Elias, his voice breaking. Did you know? Did you know all along? Elias looked at his son. The disappointment in his eyes was heavier than any anger. I knew, Elias said softly. I watched every keystroke. I listened to every lie. Why didn't you stop it? Daniel whispered. Why did you let it get this far? Because I wanted to see, Elias said, his voice hardening into steel. When there was $15 million on the table and the wolves were circling, which daughter you would choose to protect? He gestured to me with his cane. You stood in the doorway, Daniel. You watched them beat her, and you did nothing. Daniel flinched as if he had been struck. He looked at me, tears spilling down his cheeks. But I felt nothing for him. The time for his protection had passed 10 years ago. Lila saw the walls closing in. She saw the board members pulling out their phones, likely calling the federal authorities. She saw her life of luxury evaporating into a prison cell. Panic took over. Rationality vanished. No! She shrieked. She lunged toward the table where my laptop sat connected to the screen. Turn it off! Turn it off! She scrambled for the computer, her manicured nails clawing at the keyboard, trying to slam the lid shut, trying to kill the image of the map that was condemning her. Do not touch it! I shouted, stepping forward. But I didn't need to intervene. Leave it! Elias roared. His voice was thunderous, shocking everyone with its volume. Lila froze, her hands hovering over the laptop, panting like a trapped animal. No one turns it off, Elias commanded. He wheeled his chair forward, placing himself between Lila and the screen. He looked at the map, the red lines and the blue lines, perfectly aligned, shining like a neon indictment of greed. Sit down, Lila, Elias said. The show is not over. Tonight, we are going to sit here and we are going to look at every single mile of this map. We are going to see exactly where you tried to take us. Lila collapsed into the chair, sobbing into her hands. Harper sat on the floor, staring blankly at the wall. My father wept silently in the corner. I stood next to Elias. He reached out and placed his hand on my arm. It was warm. It was strong. Good map. Sloane, he whispered. so only I could hear. It was a difficult route, I whispered back. The best ones always are, he said. Then he looked at the board. Gentlemen, call the sheriff. We have a theft to report. The room did not explode. Real climaxes rarely happen with a bang. They happen with the quiet, suffocating sound of air leaving a balloon. After the video ended, after the digital map faded from the screen, there was only the hum of the laptop fan and the ragged breathing of my stepmother. Mr. Sterling, the family attorney, was the first to break the silence. He didn't look at Lila. He didn't look at Harper. He looked at his briefcase, snapping the locks shut with a finality that sounded like a gavel. Mrs. Mercer, Sterling said, his voice devoid of its usual obsequious warmth. Given the evidence presented, specifically the audio confession and the metadata linking the transfer to your personal terminal, I can no longer represent you in this matter. I am ethically bound to recuse myself. You cannot leave, Lila gasped, clutching the arm of her chair. You work for us. You work for the family. I work for the trust, Sterling corrected, stepping away from her as if she were contagious. And it appears the trust is the victim here. I cannot represent the accused and the plaintiff simultaneously. He turned to the board members. I advise the board to freeze all assets immediately and contact the district attorney. We cannot use Sloan as a scapegoat. The digital trail is too clean. If we try to bury this, we will all be indicted as accessories. It was over. The narrative Lila had spent years constructing, the perfect wife, the capable manager, the victim of a rebellious stepdaughter, had collapsed in under 10 minutes. Grandfather Elias cleared his throat. The sound commanded more attention than Lila's screaming ever could. The investigation will happen, Elias announced, his voice raspy but steady. But first, we have internal business to conclude. He looked at Mr. Gao. Execute the clause. Mr. Gao nodded solemnly. He stood up and recited the terms of the amendment Elias had secretly filed. Effective immediately, Lila Mercer and Harper Mercer are removed as beneficiaries of the Meridian Crest Family Trust due to acts of intentional financial malfeasance exceeding $5 million. All rights to inheritance, stipends, and residency are revoked. This decision is irrevocable. Revoked? Harper whispered. She looked around the room, her eyes wide and glassy. But the villas, the loans, I signed personal guarantees. Mom, if the trust does not back me, they will take everything. They will take my car, my apartment. Lila didn't answer her daughter. She was staring at the floor, her hands trembling in her lap. The loss of money was one thing, but I could see the deeper break in her eyes. She was losing her audience. She was losing the title of Mrs. Mercer. Without that, she was just a woman who had stolen from an old man and got caught. My father, Daniel, finally moved. He walked toward Elias, his hands held out in a pleading gesture. He looked broken, a man who had spent his life avoiding conflict only to be crushed by it. Father, please, Daniel begged, his voice cracking. Do not do this. Lila made a mistake. Harper is young. We can fix the money. I will take a cut in my dividends. We can pay it back over time. Just do not destroy the family. Do not call the police. Elias looked at his son with a mixture of pity and exhaustion. He didn't answer Daniel. Instead, he turned his wheelchair slowly to face me. Sloan, Elias said. The room went silent. All eyes shifted to me. The bruise on my cheek throbbed under the harsh light of the TV screen. This is your call, Elias said softly. You are the one she hit. You are the one she tried to frame. You are the one holding the map. He leaned forward, his blue eyes locking onto mine. What do you want? Do you want revenge? Do you want to see them humiliated? Do you want to hurt them the way they hurt you? I looked at Lila. She was looking up at me now, her eyes wet with fear. For the first time in my life, she wasn't looking down on me. She was begging me, silently, to be the soft, weak girl she thought I was. I looked at Harper, who was shaking her head, mouthing the word, please. I felt a surge of heat in my chest. It would be so easy. I could scream at them. I could demand they be thrown out into the street tonight. I could spit on the floor and tell them they deserve to rot. But then I looked at the map on the screen. The blue lines, the logic, the order. Revenge was chaotic. Revenge was messy. It was an emotional reaction, like a slap in the face. Justice was a system. Justice was logistics. I do not want revenge, I said, my voice steady. Revenge implies that I take this personally. I do not. This is just business. I turned to Elias. I want everything to go by the book. No more, no less. I want the audit to be completed. I want the police report to be filed regarding the theft and the assault. I want the courts to decide the penalty. Sloan, my father cried out, you are sending your mother to prison. She is not my mother, Daniel, I said calmly, and I am not sending her anywhere. She bought the ticket when she signed the transfer order. I am just checking the manifest. I looked back at Elias. Do not use your influence to bury this, grandfather, and do not use it to crush them extra hard. Either. Let the system work. No one gets framed for a crime they didn't commit. Not me, and not them. If they are innocent, let them prove it to a judge. A slow smile spread across Elias's face. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was a smile of relief. He had tested me one last time. He wanted to see if power would corrupt me the way it had corrupted them. Good, Elias whispered. That is the answer of a CEO. He picked up a document from his lap and handed it to Mr. Gao. Read the rest of the addendum, Elias ordered. Mr. Gao cleared his throat. Upon the activation of the bad actor clause, the controlling interest in Meridian Crest Holdings, 60% of voting shares, is immediately transferred to the alternate beneficiary, Sloan Mercer. Lila gasped, a sound like a dying engine. Furthermore, Mr. Gao continued, the trust authorizes an exclusive 10-year contract with Flowgrid Route Holdings to manage the logistics and supply chain operations for all Meridian Crest commercial properties. I stared at Elias. He was giving me the company, not just the money, but the work. He was giving me the keys to the empire Lila had tried to steal, and he was paying my company to run it. And the $15 million? Elias asked, prompting the lawyer. The funds currently frozen in the Azure Horizon account. Mr. Gao read, pending a fraud determination, will be reclassified under the venture capital agreement. If the court rules the transfer was fraudulent, the full amount converts to equity investment in Flowgrid Route Holdings. I looked at the screen again. The $15 million Lila had stolen to build Harper's Vanity Project was going to become the seed capital that would take Flowgrid national. The irony was absolute. Lila had risked everything to get that money, and in doing so, she had personally delivered it to my bank account. It is not a trophy, Elias said to me, his voice serious. It is an investment. Do not waste it. Lila slumped forward, burying her face in her hands. She wasn't crying about the money anymore. She was crying because she realized she was no longer the main character of this story. She was just a footnote in mine. Harper stood up, her face pale. I have to go, she stammered. I have to call the bank. Maybe I can stop the foreclosure. You cannot, I said gently. The assets are frozen. Harper, the project is dead. But I know a distressed asset fund that might buy the land from you for pennies on the dollar. You might be able to pay off your credit card debt. Harper looked at me with pure hatred, then turned and ran out of the guest house, disappearing into the dark. The sound of sirens cut through the night air. Blue and red lights flashed against the window, mixing with the steady red blink of the camera clock. Lila stood up unsteadily. She looked at Daniel. Do something, she hissed. Fix this. Daniel looked at her. He looked at the woman who had isolated him from his father and his daughter. He looked at the empty space where his dignity used to be. I cannot, he whispered. 2 deputies entered the room, led by the sheriff who had known our family for 20 years. He looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer, the sheriff said, taking off his hat. We need you to come down to the station. We have some questions about a wire transfer, and a report of a domestic assault. Lila didn't fight. She walked out with her head high, clinging to the last shreds of her delusion, convinced she could talk her way out of it in the morning. When the room cleared, it was just me, Elias, and Daniel. My father walked over to me. He looked older than he had an hour ago. "Sloan," he said, reaching out a hand. "I am so sorry. I wanted to keep the family intact. I thought if we just kept the peace." I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "You cannot keep the peace by letting someone wage war on your child. Dad." "I know," he wept. "I failed you. Can you forgive me? Can we start over?" "We can move forward," I said. "But we are not starting over. The map has changed. You are welcome to visit me in Denver. Dad, but I am not coming back here to live. This house, it is too full of ghosts." He nodded, accepting the distance I had put between us. It was the only way we could ever have a relationship again, with boundaries as thick as the walls of a fortress. He turned and walked out to the porch, sitting alone in the rocking chair, watching the police lights fade into the distance. Elias wheeled his chair over to me. He reached out and took my hand. His grip was frail, but his skin was warm. "I did not save you, Sloan," he said quietly. "Do not think I did. You saved yourself. You saw the camera. You made the speech. You connected the maps. You gave me the USB drive," I said. "You gave me the tools." "I just put up a few road signs." Elias smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You are the one who drove the truck through the wall." He patted my hand. "Go back to Denver tomorrow. Build your company. Make that $15 million work so hard it sweats. And Sloan?" "Yes, grandfather?" "Hire Marcy as your office manager. She hates it here." 6 months later. The snow was falling softly on the streets of Denver. From my corner office on the 10th floor, I could see the highway stretching out toward the mountains. Flow grid route. Holdings was no longer a scrappy startup. We had acquired 3 competitors in the last quarter. The $15 million had been cleared by the courts and deposited into our operating account the same day. Lila pleaded guilty to wire fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. But we weren't just moving goods for profit anymore. I looked at the screen on my desk. It showed a fleet of flow grid trucks moving through a low-income neighborhood in East Cleveland, one of the areas where Meridian Crest owned affordable housing units. We were using our optimization software to coordinate the delivery of fresh produce and medical supplies to food deserts, cutting the delivery costs by 40%, so the savings could be passed to the residents. The money that had been stolen to build a luxury villa for the rich was now paying for milk and insulin for the poor. It wasn't revenge, it was realignment. I closed my laptop and picked up a framed photo on my desk. It was a picture of me and Elias, taken last week when he visited the new headquarters. He was sitting in his wheelchair, wearing a Flowgrid baseball cap, pointing at a map with a grin on his face. I checked the time. I had a flight to catch. I was going back to Mapleton for the weekend to supervise the renovation of the Guesthouse. I was turning it into a computer lab for the local high school. I walked out of the building and got into my car. As I drove, I thought about that night in the Guesthouse. I thought about the slap. I thought about the red light. I arrived at the airport and pulled up my old tracking app. Just out of habit, I saw the blue line of my flight path. Straight, efficient, true. I stood alone in the Guesthouse one last time before the contractors arrived. The clock was still there on the wall, but the camera was gone. The red light was dark. I reached out and touched the plaster where my head had hit the wall. It was cold. The pain was a memory, fading like the bruise that had long since healed. "This is where they tried to break me," I whispered to the empty room. "And this is where the truth finally stood up." I walked out the door, leaving the door unlocked. I didn't need to lock it anymore. I owned the house. Voice over. This was not a story about $15 million. Money is just paper and numbers. This is a story about the value your family assigns to you and the value you have to assign to yourself when they get the math wrong. Justice is not about making someone else bleed. Justice is when the truth of who you are finally matches the way the world treats you, It is about correcting the data. Have you ever been the one asked to take the fall? Have you ever been the convenient sacrifice for someone else's mistake? I want to know. Tell me which city you are listening from in the comments below. Maybe somewhere on the map. We are learning the same lesson. When they try to draw you as the villain in their story, you have the right to pick up the pen and redraw the map yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. If you believe in writing your own ending, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel. Hit the like button to support the truth, and smash that hype button so this story can travel further down the road. Until next time, keep your eyes on the road.